people don't really acknowledge about Bitcoin. It's this idea that you're able to like invest in an asset and completely eliminate counterparty risk.
I think the US ETF really picked up a lot of steam and a lot of adoption for the Bitcoin price. And I feel like more people are finding an easier way to transact in Bitcoin.
AI has, automated a certain number of jobs, and then companies aren't hiring or are firing people because AI can do a better job. But the new companies that are going to replace that haven't been created yet.
Cash is king. Like I think we've realized in the past couple of weeks, like Warren Buffett now has over $300 billion saved up in cash that I can use to buy stuff right now on a discount. People always say, oh, hold on to some cash, hold on to some petty cash. I think it's starting to like make sense.
Hey everyone, welcome to the episode 3 of the Core Life Capital. I'm here with Matt and Soham, as usual, our co-hosts. So there has been some exciting news and development. So I think, Matt, you just went to a Bitcoin conference in Washington, D.C. Tell us how that went.
Yeah, it was great. It was called OpNext, and it was basically talking about what is the future of Bitcoin, right? So what are the changes that are upcoming to Bitcoin, and what are they going to be, and how are they going to improve Bitcoin for the better? And maybe what are some of the concerns that people have with those upcoming changes, and what things would it enable if we did implement those things?
So for our listeners who are probably mostly in their 20s, I want to go to Matt first about like why you're so firm into believing Bitcoin will always be number one when we have Solana, when we have other coins are just taking place and potentially stealing the thunder from the second and third spot. There might be an argument of, okay, why isn't it coming for Bitcoin? So I'll go to Matt first and then Soham next.
Well, I think Bitcoin is really, it was the only cryptocurrency at the very beginning that was created where, when it was originally created, the intention of everyone joining and wanting to use it, the intention was not to have a get-rich-quick scheme. Back in the day, Bitcoin was worth nothing, right? So Hal Finney, the early, Bitcoin developers that, were interested in it, they weren't there to make a huge return. They were just like, oh, this is a really interesting idea of money. It's worth nothing today. It might be worth something in the future, but we want to, help develop it in order to create something of it. It was the computer scientists, the cryptographers, the CryptoPunks that were like really excited about it. Or sorry, the cypherpunks that were really excited about it, not the CryptoPunks. That's an NFT thing. That doesn't line up. So they were really excited about the idea of it, whereas later cryptocurrencies, it was a situation where everybody already knew that you could get rich quick, and so they knew that creating that cryptocurrency. And the other thing is Bitcoin has 15 years of proving itself in the market, and it doesn't have one owner, right? Satoshi can't come in and make a decision that's going to completely ruin the coin. It's very difficult to do governance, which I think is a feature in some aspects.
Okay, and Soham, I want to talk more about the recent years. We've seen more. Matt, when did the Bitcoin become an ETF in the US?
It was last year, and I believe it was either in January or February, and it was a BlackRock ETF. Canada actually had it first way back in 2021, but most people didn't know about it.
Okay. So I think the US ETF really picked up a lot of steam and a lot of adoption for the Bitcoin price. And I feel like more people are finding an easier way to transact in Bitcoin. So I know you have a lot of experience in the capital markets. So what do you think of those two correlating together? Like are stock market movements, are they moving Bitcoin more and more with those tariffs, for example?
No, I completely agree with you. I think the idea of like the ETF being introduced was probably one of the biggest catalysts for Bitcoin. Overall, I think it's one of the best vehicles for anyone that's like a long-term investor. The S&P 500, when that started becoming an ETF, when Bogle first created the ETF for that, that's when it started taking off. An ETF just allows for every person, including me, you, and everyone else, to just be able to buy something with ease. I think with Bitcoin, one of the big speculations for why people didn't buy it was complicated. And it was this idea of like the ID is like, if you don't copy and paste this exact wallet address correctly, you'll lose it forever, right? So those kind of difficulties become hard versus something in like the traditional finance space where you've already been used to it. You buy stocks on a daily basis, sometimes without doing research, sometimes with doing research, but meme stocks, everything exists. And so I think the ETF became the perfect way for people to actually start coming into the thing, added liquidity for Bitcoin to another layer. And then the other part is the conversion.
Tell us more about that. So they just announced they will allow people to convert.
So this was like a couple of months ago, but they filed regulations to be able to do on-spot conversion from like your shares into actual Bitcoin. For whatever every amount of share you own X amount of Bitcoin, right? And so that one conversion right there will help a lot of people. If you ever want to actually exit the traditional finance space, you'll be able to do it with ease. But if you want to enter back into that space too, it becomes easier for you to have it through something like an ETF where your entire portfolio is being tracked anyways and everything like that. You can see it cleanly in whatever UI, whatever like brokerage account you use. It makes it easier for a lot of people that are a bit more skeptical. I mean, it's a brand new asset, right? Change will like terrify anybody. So I think like easing it in through an ETF makes a lot of sense for a lot of people.
Right, and I think, Matt, like there might be a flip side to this. On one side, I think ETF does make it a lot easier for anyone to buy. But then I think there's maybe two sides of this. The first is the sovereign side, which is if you're buying a lot of ETFs, but governments potentially could seize it at some point, right? Even most people, I think, will think of this as like, oh, it's never going to happen. Well, obviously, there's a chance the government will come and seize your Bitcoin ETFs because those are just ETFs. Those are not actually Bitcoins. You're not actually buying Bitcoins. And the second thing I saw was that ETFs are only trading from 9:30 to 4, right? They're not trading 24 hours. So I just want to, as a Bitcoiner, what do you think of those ETFs?
I mean, I think it's a great way to get people in, but what I hope is that people go and, then upgrade their setup later, right? So if you've gone and you've bought the ETF Bitcoin, that you're later going to go and actually buy real Bitcoin. And the reason I think that's really important is, we can look at a nice chart. Actually, James O'Byrne from the OpNext conference actually had a chart with this, which basically showed, legal ownership of gold. All the way up until 1932, it was yes, you could have legal ownership of gold. And then right in 1933, it goes to no, because the Executive Order 6102 comes in, the government confiscates the gold. So if you're keeping your Bitcoin as ETF Bitcoin, or you're keeping it on an exchange, then you've done half the work for them, because now, in order for them to confiscate your Bitcoin, they don't need to go knock on your door. They go knock on Coinbase's door or other custodian's door. And this isn't an impossible thing. This is less than 100 years ago that this occurred. So it's a non-zero chance. So yeah, start with ETF, but at some point you should be withdrawing that Bitcoin, to self-custody, and start with a mobile wallet on your phone with a seed phrase. And then you can upgrade later to, have a hardware wallet, right?
Okay, yeah, I think we will talk about that more in detail.
But I will just say one thing. Just 2 years ago, during COVID with the Freedom Convoy in Canada, we have seen governments even recently confiscate people's finances.
And I think exit taxes as well. They can introduce a new set of taxes if you want to sell your Bitcoin ETFs, right? In which case, I just read this news last night. There's a proposed Republican tax change that's basically as like a tariff countermeasures into different countries because the world invests in U.S. equities and ETFs. So they're proposing a 15% tax when foreign investors sell their capital gains. Soham, what do you think about other assets potentially? Let's say for some investors in their 20s who, let's say, have $1,000 every month to invest, what would you recommend them to invest in?
I would also recommend Bitcoin to a certain extent. I think there's an asymmetric risk that it makes a lot more sense to own some than not to own some. That's just like the core of it. Outside of that, if you want true diversification, I also do like the idea of gold. I think right now USA has become very nationalistic about like protecting everything from inside the borders. So it becomes hard to, as an investor from outside of USA, to want to go into US. They're starting to trade like, much more of like a emerging markets country. They're becoming much more risky. So I wouldn't recommend the S&P 500 as much as maybe one of those like full VTO, like the full world index ETF, something along those lines, if you want just pure on equity exposure as well.
Okay.
I was laughing the other day, like looking at the S&P 500. It's like, oh, it fell 5.5%, and it was like Bitcoin fell. Actually, no, Bitcoin went up. So basically, we had a day where the volatility of the S&P 500 was higher than Bitcoin, and everyone's saying, "Oh, I don't want to buy Bitcoin because it's too volatile."
Yeah.
And I think one thing you should add is one thing people don't really acknowledge about Bitcoin. It's this idea that you're able to like invest in an asset and completely eliminate counterparty risk to zero. The idea is that if you're buying Bitcoin, you don't have to worry about what anyone else on like the planet does. Like what Matt was saying before about this idea of consensus. Even with the block size wars, the incumbents did end up winning, right? Like it's not like new members were able to win. But with all these other assets you're gonna be buying, there's a lot of control on like the inside that you don't really see too much about. I would recommend just like looking into it a little bit more as well.
Okay, Matt, I do want to talk about something that when young people first get into Bitcoin, we just talk about how they can start with ETFs. and then get an actual blockchain set up. So I actually had a personal experience of setting that up a few months ago, obviously. And I think for me, the surprise was that when you place an order, it wasn't delivered immediately, right? There was like a transaction fees. You have to wait for the blocks to form. So I do want to ask, like, for people who are, not that technical, it might be a lot of things for them to learn all at once, right? So I know you also talk about, like, there has to be a better, easier way for people to own their own Bitcoins. So for those people, let's say in their 20s and 30s, like, what would you tell them to consider? Or is there anything you want to tell the Bitcoin community to reconsider making it easier?
Well, I think it's both, actually. So it's like, okay, if you're a young person, you might graduate from the ETF, and then maybe you start moving that over to a nice exchange, and then you might move that over to, okay, well, I'm going to move that over to a mobile wallet where I have my seed phrase on there, and that's kind of an easy transition, and I'm going to back that up. I think there's a progression that you can do as a new Bitcoiner to kind of start increasing your self-sovereignty. And I wouldn't say move all your coins right away. If you have a certain amount of Bitcoin ETF, maybe move 5% of it and then double check your setup. And then once you have that, then you can go and add more. But I agree with you that the process, like, it's scary to go and set up your own self-custody today. You have to be worried about the fact that if you lose that, those 12 words, that seed phrase, which represent your private key, that all of your Bitcoin is gone. If someone steals it, or if you just completely lose it, then it's gone forever. You've made a donation to the rest of Bitcoiners because no one can access it. So the improvements, I think, were actually very relevant to the conference I was just at, which was, okay, well, we need some improvements to Bitcoin called covenants. Any advanced civilization, you would think that their money would be based on energy.
I think the number one thing I use it more than anything else is just this idea of brainstorming. The idea of just having someone that you can talk to. They take great meeting minutes for you, whatever you're saying, but then they also then like interact with you. They do research for you. It becomes really easy. I like going on walks at night a lot. So I'll put my AirPods in, I'll just go on a walk, and I'll just I'll talk through, like, oh, what is this? Like, what's a mug, for example? And you can start digging really deep into a topic.
Mm-hmm.
You basically,
are you using ChatGPT?
Yeah, I'll use chat the most because I think the voice of chat is very, like, eloquent, and like I've actually just gotten used to it a lot. I tried using Grok's voice. That was kind of pitchy. I didn't like it too much.
Right.
And then the other way I'll also use, like, AI is, I tried using Cursor, Windsurf, and the Firebase Studio, like, as like the IDEs to code. I can't do it well.
Okay.
So I think that's like a little bit harder for somebody coming from an outside background. But one other thing I think is so useful from like AI is this idea of like context. Like, I can give it a screenshot of something and it kind of explains to me, oh, what's going on in this diagram, what's going on there. So sometimes those like really elaborate graphs that have no proper legend or anything along those lines, I'm able to use AI to be able to see, well, what's this actually trying to say, and dissect good analysis from that.
Okay. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about my setup, which is, I find myself being a more frequent AI user in recent months. I feel like I came to be using it so much every day. It's really hard to imagine living without it, at least for me personally, right? And I started using ChatGPT 2 years ago, and then now my setup is ChatGPT for a little bit for work, and how I do it is basically setting up projects. So they have this ChatGPT projects. So every project I have, it will be a project on ChatGPT, and then I'll upload the files. I'll upload like some relevant details, and I really appreciate that they're burning money on this product, so that there's not actually any limit. Right, as a Plus user, which I'm paying, I think $20 a month US. I think that's how much I pay. Mm-hmm. I can essentially talk to it endlessly, right? For whatever I need, and then it remembers the context. So, for example, I was reading this book. I was telling you guys about like the sovereign individual, and there was this one chat. I think it has maybe like 200, 500 conversations, like back and forth, and I can still add conversations on it, and I know that it has like a good enough context that I can actually add things to it that fits exactly like talking to different people. So that's amazing for me. I think for Claude, I use Claude AI, even though like a bit less recently, but I think Claude is really great for writing, at least for me, and also obviously for coding, but I use Cursor for that. So for Claude, I use it for permitted conversations. I have a quick question about workouts. I ask Claude because it's a little bit more conversational. Gemini, I use a little bit more on the deep research side. So they have this Gemini 2.5 deep research, which I really enjoy using. And as I said in the last episode, it comes with my work subscription with Google Workplace. So those are my setup. Matt, what's your setup?
Yeah, that's really cool, George. On my end, I've got obviously using Cursor quite a bit. So Cursor is great for me because you can obviously put it into agent mode or ask mode, and you can also provide a lot of context. So I've been doing some like kind of hacky things to get it to have more context about my project. For example, I'll run like the tree command, which basically like outputs all of the files that are in my project, and then that provides that as context to Cursor, and then Cursor also indexes all the files in my coding project as well. So then I'm able to ask it like, oh, this issue is happening with this, or this issue is happening with that. And it can actually go with the agent and just write it all out. Now, sometimes it makes a lot of mistakes. Like it's really, really great at doing like UI components, but it depends on what type of like front end it's creating. But connecting to that to a back end, it almost always messes up. And so you've really got to, know which things it can be useful for. The other thing I've been experimenting with too is taking basically my entire code base, and there's websites now like instead of putting github.com, you can put GitHub, and then it'll basically output diagrams that you can go and import into Cursor that will then give it a better sense of how your project is structured. And then there's another one too, where we'll basically output all of your code that is very easily importable into the code of your entire repository, and you can import that directly into Cursor. So that has been incredibly helpful. Been experimenting with like Windsurf versus Cursor. Cursor is like, I think, faster, and then Windsurf is like slightly more accurate. So, you can kind of switch between them for that.
Right.
So I have so many more things I want to experiment with too. We're just getting started.
Yeah, I feel like we definitely use different types of cursor because it's very different from the cursor I'm using. So for our readers who might want to try out Cursor, because I know the adoption rate is still low compared to general population, share a little bit more about like, okay, what are the one-on-one of Cursor? How do you use it most straightforward way?
The most straightforward way. I mean, I think just download it and open it up in your code base, and then you either put it in agent mode or ask mode, right? So if you trust it to write code, okay. By the way, if you are a like vibe coder and you know nothing about coding, like be careful about putting it in agent mode and learn how to use Git, which is like versioning. Learn how to do versioning on your code, because there was this guy who was like posting on Reddit like, oh, I lost 4 months of work putting it in agent mode, and I'm like, dude, yeah, you need to be like, saving your files and creating versioning of your files.
I feel like you could use agent mode just as like a fun thing of like, okay, I'm seeing things happening right in front of my eyes. I would say yes, learn Git, or if you don't know how to use Git, maybe tell Cursor agent to use Git for you. Perhaps that's a good way to save your progress. And also versioning is actually quite important, because there are often some times where I use Cursor and it will mess up the whole entire project. And I'm not vibe coding, by the way. I was like just coding. And then I have to switch the branch. I have to delete the former branch. I would start an entirely different branch and start coding from there. And also my advice would be to really use a language that is really common, that AI agents can actually understand quite well. I'm not sure about what language AI screws up quite a lot, but
yeah, like for example, I think it's like quite good at Python, quite good at JavaScript. But then, for example, like if you try to get it to create a front end that like does anything related to like trading charts or something, it will totally mess up. So you have to be very careful on what thing you're doing. And then like Go, it's pretty good with. Rust, it's terrible with. C++, it's okay with. Right? So it's like you really got to like know which language to use, and it's going to be appropriate for you when you're vibe coding.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I just want to talk Soham a little bit more about like when we were in college, the computer science courses were teaching us about C++ and Racket. So it was more about the science. Maybe it's not less about like applications, right? So I'm like, what would you say for people who had like computer science degree or have something to do with computer science, and they're out of the workplace and they're finding very hard to find a job?
I think it's a good question. I think that bridge right there needs to be created for all the next generation of coders and everything along those lines.
Okay, Matt, do you think the future of like software engineering is shifting more towards people who can do the best of both worlds, so like the best of computer science, but also the best of like business and applications and explain?
Well, I do think that there's going to be more and more solopreneurs. There's this like really nice chart showing like the number of solopreneurs like without funding has like dramatically increased in the last little while. And so I think that becomes more important. And there's like right now we have a situation where jobs haven't caught up, right? Where we've had a situation where AI has, automated a certain number of jobs, and then companies aren't hiring or are firing people because AI can do a better job. But the new companies that are going to replace that haven't been created yet. And so I think those things are going to need to catch up, and then we'll reach equilibrium. But I think the other thing too is like, even as a coder, if you just think you can come in and you can vibe code it together, you probably can for a very simple UI or MVP. But like if you're actually building a real application, it's going to completely mess you up, and you're going to need to know like how it works. So what I would say is use AI in order to ask the questions that are going to allow you to learn 10x faster than you were able to in the past. In the past, when you were learning, you had to go through documentation for 30 minutes to understand how a basic API worked. Now you've got that at your fingertips. So take advantage of that to learn like way faster than you could before.
That's a really good point. And I think recently there are also this leak on Reddit regarding Shopify. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of it, but the Shopify CEO essentially sent an email to everyone at Shopify and saying that every manager who's thinking about hiring a new person needs to prove in writing why this job wouldn't be able to be done with AI. And it was like, and when I first saw it, I was like, oh wow, he's really putting like what you're not supposed to say out loud, right? And I think this is really there's a huge implication for this for people who are already in the workforce and people who are just entering the workforce. So yeah, Matt, like I guess what do you think about this? Like, does it mean just like less job opportunities for young people in general? And what are you supposed to do?
Well, first of all, as a previous intern at Shopify, let's go, Toby. I think that's actually awesome for them to be doing, because I think it's like you need to stay ahead of the times, right? And so, if you're joining Shopify, then the expectation is that you're going to have a certain proficiency in AI, and you're going to know how to leverage that as well as possible. You're going to be a fantastic developer, but you're also going to know how to leverage AI to make you faster, because really what it is it's being able to work with a junior dev that might have some challenges here or there, but if that can speed you up in what you're building, and you can be a 2x developer because of that, then you're just going to be, that much faster at outputting code or outputting that much more efficiently. Or knowing what they're, I think, really looking to do is to figure out, well, how can we bring people into our organization that also know AI very well? We've already got engineers that understand the code base extremely well, but who are the engineers that we can bring in to speed up processes? For example, if new code changes are being made, how can we get AI to review that? That speeds up the process of merging that code into the code base. So I think that's really smart, to be honest.
Okay, Soham?
Yeah, I'd probably take the exact same stance. I think the idea is that overall it is going to become very powerful. I think for whatever job descriptions we have today, it becomes hard to justify hiring somebody versus just using AI, because I think the job descriptions are simpler. But I think what does need to change is this idea that in the next like 5-ish years, the idea is those job descriptions are not going to stay the same. Like in the same way, what used to be taxi drivers, and like the way you'd get a taxi is by like becoming a driver, is you'd buy the medallion, right? And that used to be over $100,000, right? What ended up happening is Uber came in, Lyft came in, and these were disruptive to the industry, but then people got like good living still, like now becoming an Uber driver, now becoming a Lyft driver. And then outside, because of Uber, Lyft, what happened is like DoorDash, Uber Eats, those industries were also able to be created, right?
Well, I feel like humans are good at creating work for themselves.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I actually want to share something like relevant on this topic. Like I wanted to hire somebody for graphic design for social media, and then ChatGPT's new image generator came out. No, I was like dead serious. I was like, okay, we're having this person, we're putting this request on LinkedIn, on Indeed, and whatever, on Glassdoor, and then this hits. And now I'm like, okay, I guess I don't really need to, like on the one hand, oh shit, it's actually a good thing for small businesses, right? So on the other hand, just concerned about like, okay, the disruptions of all that. So that's why I was saying a little bit concerned about that, because I think of myself many years ago as a junior developer, it will probably be a lot harder for that same George to find a junior developer job in Toronto.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I think it's so interesting for like the image generation side, because like now, like a person who is not an artist can like generate logos. By the way, guys, Quarter Life Capital is AI generated, but so we didn't need a graphic designer, right? We went to ChatGPT and we generated it. We described what we wanted. Now, but I think there is still like a case for, AI doesn't always generate it perfectly. There's always like something that's like slightly off, or like, it generates it from scratch. And so there's still like a missing piece there that like people can fill in. But now also, I think for graphic designers, they can be way more efficient, right? Instead of them having, 10 clients, they can have 100 clients. Is it great to be a graphic designer nowadays? I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit more tough. But maybe people value, art that's made from scratch more now. Or maybe they just need to switch jobs. I don't know. It's a hard one.
What do you think, Sam?
And I kind of disagree to a certain extent. I think back in the 1300s or 1400s, what used to happen was these artists would go around to like specific scenic areas and they would paint the mountain range. They would paint specific ranges and then they would come back home and sell that. What then happened was like photography got invented, right? That was a brand new class of art, for example. The idea is at the end of the day with this AI, you are still the one person at the helm. You're still the creative control. What's going to happen now is you still have to be one that says, oh, make this into like Studio Gilby, like design, for example. And that's a simple one. But now with ChatGPT's like new, I guess, tool, what you can also do is you can select specific parts of the picture, say, oh, replace this with X, replace this with Y. It's just, the idea is you just have to upskill yourself now. I don't think the idea is that artists are missing. At the end of the day, like you still are the one that's creating it. It's just you have an artist in the background that can actually execute on your behalf, but it's your vision, right?
It's basically like creativity is enabled, right? Like the creative is enabled more and more, and those that have a vision for what they want to create are able to create it on a better scale as more and more things are built that allows you to create those things faster and faster. And we all become gods eventually, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think thinking about emails, like how many emails you get, it's kind of written in ChatGPT. And I do it as well. Like sometimes I write emails and I really want to rewrite it. But now I care more about the short emails, the 1-2 sentences emails that I just read it. I'm like, great, I got it. I don't have to spend a minute reading this email. Isn't that amazing? And I kind of value more about emails that are actually written by humans. Maybe that's like a start of things. Like arts, I'm personally like appreciating more about like TV shows and other movies more than I was before, because now anybody can generate it, but it pushes me towards thinking, oh, okay, now I prefer shows that are carefully scripted, that actually has like the ups and downs, that actually keep me motivated to watch. You know, I don't know if you feel that way.
Well, George, I wonder, like the emails that you get that are short, that are written by a human. How do you know they're written by a human?
Well, the first character is always lowercase. I guess that's always a good way to tell. And there's grammar mistakes, and there are 3 dots.
Honestly, I think it's a good point. I've never even thought about the idea of like, I think one thing I did here is that AI uses dashes a lot, which is very annoying because I use dashes ever since I was a kid.
Oh, I use dashes, yes.
Yeah, but I don't think I notice it. Like, I do use it for myself in terms of writing emails. But I also do write like very short emails. I just say, oh, make this into 1 sentence. So I think like the bigger picture is, I think I just won't be able to tell. And I don't think I care enough to be able to tell, if I'm being more honest.
Yeah,
and I think that's the point.
That's true. And I have to say, like, when I go to Claude and I tell Claude, write as George Poo, it actually knows who George Poo is. It's just the craziest thing. Because I was like, how do you know who George Poo is? Because like I don't have that many followers. And it will write actually similar to my tongue.
Oh,
and
wow.
I swear to God, it's not using like my existing chat data. It's definitely scraping perhaps Twitter and other stuff.
That's crazy.
To get that information. You should try writing like Soham or Matt.
I've done a similar thing, and my friend actually generated an image of me, like basically without taking a picture of me. So he was just like, oh, Matt from Atomic Finance. And then he had to do it prompted a couple more times, like, oh, can you like look online for like pictures of him? And then he was like, oh, do Ghibli studio style, and it did it. And it was like, whoa, like
That's crazy.
You literally didn't even need to provide them a photo to generate it.
That's insane.
That's crazy. Yeah. So I guess we're reaching the last segment of the show, and I want to try something different this time. I want to try us like each giving our best takeaways of the past week or the past couple weeks, whatever, and give advice to people who are listeners who are listening. So I think my takeaway was that from the tariffs and from the ups and downs of like 10%, it's like a meme coin. I think it solidifies the point that if you're investing in something, then you should be in it for a long haul. If you're pulling something out because you're losing money, you see what happened last week was basically like people made their money back, right? I mean, largely, not all of it, but largely they made their money back. So I think if you really want to stay in for a long run, whether it's for Bitcoin, whether for treasuries, or treasuries are safe, whether for stocks or bonds, I think you need to be patient and for the long run.
Yeah, I think for me, like just coming back from the conference, I think future of Bitcoin is bright. I think we're going to get new upgrades to Bitcoin that are going to help with people being able to self-custody and store Bitcoin themselves, and we're excited to see it happen.
Yeah, speaking of, I'm also excited. I think this is going to be the first quarter where we get to see like Bitcoin mark to market on people's balance sheets for earnings. So that's going to be exciting. But I guess my bigger point is cash is king. Like I think we've realized in the past couple of weeks, like Warren Buffett now has over $300 billion saved up in cash that can use to buy stuff right now on a discount. So I think, like people always say, oh, hold on to some cash, hold on to some petty cash. I think it's starting to like make sense.
Yeah, I think we're entering very like last episode fluid period of investing as well, which is really cool. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining the show. Thank you for our listeners who have listened in. And as our listeners know, we are thinking of creating a community of core life capital, like-minded 20 and 30-year-old, or maybe other age groups, whether it's lower or higher, doesn't matter, joining us. So we have some, potentially like developments that we're going to announce probably in the coming weeks about how to join our community completely free. We're still working it out, but we would love to be more connected with our audiences. So if there's any advice that you'd like to give us, any topics that you want me, Soham, and Matt talk about, tweet to us on Twitter. I think that actually means more to me than anything else, is to get a feedback from a listener that's saying, oh, I really like this segment, I really like this segment, or this segment I would love some more clarifications, which we've got over the past week, which really amazes us. So if you know how to reach us, check the description of the podcast to reach the three of us, and your advice will shape the future of this community. So thank you guys so much, and talk soon.